Grade sequence 1, automatic type.
Oh, oh. Welcome to Monticello. Good morning. Honored guests and friends, I'm Leslie Green Bowman, President of the Thomas Jefferson Foundation. And on behalf of our board and staff, I'd like to welcome you to Monticello to celebrate Thomas Jefferson's 271st birthday. Please rise and place your hand over your heart for the posting of the colors. And now please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Color guard, shoulder your firelock. Color guard, advance colors. Place. Color. Shoulder your firelock. Reform. Color guard. Body over Webb. Wait. Roll off.
Once again, welcome. You've been applauding the Thomas Jefferson chapter of the Sons of the American Revolution and the United States Army Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps for their participation in today's ceremony. Well, Jefferson, as many of you know, did not recognize his own birthday, and instead he only recognized the anniversary of this country's independence. He wrote in 1803, "Disapproving myself of transferring the honors and veneration for the great birthday of our republic to any individual, I have declined letting my own birthday be known." End of quote. Well, the secret got out, and every April we gather at Monticello to pay tribute to this great founding father, architect of our liberty and the author of the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson's continuous quest for knowledge and the breadth of his curiosity and intellect inspired a young nation. Today we recognize Jefferson's lasting legacy and its continued inspiration to new generations of leaders. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you Don King, the chair of our Board of Trustees.
Thank you, Leslie. Good morning. Each year, in collaboration with the University of Virginia, we present our highest honors, the Thomas Jefferson Foundation Medals in architecture, law, and citizen leadership. The medals recognize individuals who embrace endeavors that were meaningful to Jefferson and in which he excelled. I'm proud to introduce our speaker this morning, the Honorable James H. Webb, Jr., and the recipient of the 2014 Thomas Jefferson Foundation Medal in Citizen Leadership. Like Jefferson, Senator Webb has demonstrated citizen leadership in multiple fields. He is our former U.S. Senator from Virginia, former Secretary of the Navy, and a highly decorated Vietnam veteran. In addition to his public service, he has enjoyed a long career as a successful journalist, author, and filmmaker. Today he is joined by his wife, Hong Lee. After graduating from the U.S. Naval Academy, Senator Webb led combat troops as a Marine infantry officer in Vietnam. He was awarded the Navy Cross, the Silver Star Medal, 2 Bronze Star Medals, and 2 Purple Hearts for his service. Following law school at Georgetown, Senator Webb worked as counsel to Congress and as an assistant secretary of defense. In 1987, he became the first Naval Academy graduate in history to serve in the military and become Secretary of the Navy. Elected to the Senate in 2006, Senator Webb served on the Foreign Relations, Armed Services, Veteran Affairs, and Joint Economic Committees. He authored and passed the most significant veterans legislation since World War II. The Atlantic magazine praised Senator Webb as one of the world's, quote, brave thinkers, end quote, for tackling prison reform and possessing, quote, 2 things vanishingly rare in Congress, a conscience and a spine. Senator Webb has excelled in fields beyond government service. Traveling widely as a journalist, he earned an Emmy for his PBS coverage of the U.S. Marines in Beirut in 1983. In 2004, he was embedded with the U.S. military in Afghanistan. The author of 10 books, Senator Webb's novel Fields of Fire is widely recognized as the classic novel of the Vietnam War. He also wrote the original story and produced the Hollywood film Rules of Engagement, which topped U.S. box offices in April of 2000. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable James H. Webb, Jr., a citizen leader who personifies Thomas Jefferson's legacy of public service.
Thank you, Don King, for that kind introduction. And let me take a moment also to thank President Leslie Green Bowman and Dean Harry Harding and those who work with them at the Thomas Jefferson Foundation and at the Batten School of Leadership here at the University of Virginia for all the courtesies that have been extended to me and my wife Hung during our visit. I also would like to recognize, if I may, a couple of people who worked with us when I was in the United States Senate. Paul Reagan, who was our chief of staff, who has come up to be with us today. He has now assumed the duties of chief of staff of our governor. And Gordon Peterson, who served our country for 30 years as a naval officer and worked very intimately on all of the issues involved in our Armed Services Committee responsibilities. So Paul and Gordon, welcome, and thank you for being here. I was thinking about something when President Leslie Green Bowman mentioned that Thomas Jefferson didn't like to recognize his birthdays. I can relate to that at this point in my life. So only thing I can say to Mr. Jefferson is we outed you here, and happy 271st birthday. I'm grateful to be joining this distinguished group of people who have previously received the Foundation's Citizen Leadership Award, and also to be saying a few words to you on these historic grounds on the celebration of President Jefferson's birthday. You know, when I was told that I would be receiving this medal and that I would be invited to speak, I was also gently reminded in print that if I wanted to use any Thomas Jefferson quotes, the Foundation would be happy to verify for me whether Mr. Jefferson actually ever said or wrote the quotes that were being used. In fact, the exact sentence from my email was, "Thomas Jefferson is one of the most quoted and misquoted presidents that have ever been," I lost my page here. Anyway, you get the point. And the staff at Monticello stands ready to assist in providing and verifying these quotes or facts. Now, let's face it, I've seen some of these earlier speeches here, and every single person who comes to Thomas Jefferson's home in order to celebrate his birthday and receive an award named in his honor starts off with a little bit of an inferiority complex. Now, here's a guy who built this wonderful home, invented all sorts of things, read 16 hours a day. I did not verify this fact with Monticello, but I did read it in a book that won 2 Pulitzer Prizes. He founded a university. He wrote the Declaration of Independence, and oh, by the way, he served as Secretary of State and President, just to name a few of his political offices. So it's kind of natural to want to find some really obscure but powerful quote and just to prove that we've paid attention to Mr. Jefferson's career and could do better than simply spouting out the stock phrases that are required learning for just about every 8th grader in the country. But if you'll forgive me, I think I'll take a little different approach today. I want to go to Mr. Jefferson's most remembered words. They have had enormous impact throughout America and all over the world. And yet in the ultimate irony, they've often been used against him by some critics who wish to demean his brilliance and his vision by blaming him for things he did not do, rather than celebrating the historic accomplishment of what he actually did. And as we consider all this, let's also give some thought to whether we ourselves might be missing something in the way we have approached issues of equality, opportunity in modern times, and whether we who live in this generation might in the future be faulted for an incomplete set of answers by those who are coming along, say, 20 or 50 or 100 years from now. The quote, obviously, is from the Declaration of Independence. I will read it. "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, I would say, in terms of theology and the natural rights of humankind, it seems clear and inarguable, should be to most of us, I think, that this great quote meant the same thing when Mr. Jefferson wrote it as it does today, even though the interpretation of its meaning might be different. But in terms of how societies function in one era or the next, or how governments perform, these words could be best called aspirational, written in the context of a society as it then defined the terms. The words also mark a journey that still continues. Some argue that the slaveholding Mr. Jefferson was philosophically disingenuous to have written such words while keeping his slaves, and I'm sure there are a lot of strong opinions in the audience on that point. But for the moment, let's understand the power of the words themselves as they have been used to help shape the future. Throughout history, there have been a handful of documents that have shaped governmental systems, human rights, in ways that far transcend the original intention of the document itself. The Magna Carta immediately comes to mind. It's an agreement signed in 1215 by King John of England during a confrontation with his most powerful barons in a rural place called Runnymede. The Magna Carta is credited with beginning England's march toward representative government, defining certain limits to a monarch's authority and creating the beginnings of democracy. But in 1215, its purpose and its immediate effect was that the king acknowledged he was in some ways accountable to a layer of aristocrats who ranked just below him. The barons who forced King John to sign it wanted to make sure he was accountable to them, not to the serfs and cobblers who lacked nobility. But the principle that was established with that document marked England's irreversible march toward a judicial and parliamentary system and toward democracy itself. And so it was with Thomas Jefferson, historic words in the Declaration of Independence. Let's consider the era and the journey. Virginia, and indeed the American South, was a complicated place in Thomas Jefferson's day and in the decades thereafter. Contrary to popular mythology, it was not simply a land of white versus black, or even of widespread ownership of slaves. The Old South was a three-tiered society with blacks and ordinary whites living under a veneer of white elites. Forgive me for pointing this out here in Charlottesville, but they were known as Cavaliers, who often manipulated racial tensions in order to retain power. At the height of slavery, in 1860, less than 5% of whites in the South actually owned slaves, by the account of the most eminent black historian in America, John Hope Franklin. Franklin also wrote, and I quote, that fully 3/4 of the white people in the South had neither slaves nor an immediate economic interest in the maintenance of slavery. When slavery ended and the inhumanity of the Jim Crow laws began, this three-tiered system continued. The Civil War devastated the South in human and economic terms. And from post-Civil War Reconstruction to the beginning of World War II, the region was a ravaged place, affecting black and white alike. In 1938, President Franklin Roosevelt created a national commission to study what he termed, and I quote, the long and ironic history of despoiling this truly American section. At that time, most industries in the South were owned by companies outside the region. Of the South's 1.8 million sharecroppers, 1.2 million were white, which was a mirror of the population, which at that time was 71% white. The illiteracy rate in the South was 5 times that of the North Central states, more than twice that of New England and the Middle Atlantic, despite the waves of European immigrants that were then flowing into those regions. The total endowment of all the colleges and universities in the South were less than the endowments of Harvard and Yale alone. The average school child in the South had $25 a year spent on his or her education, compared to his $141 for children in New York. Thus said the Presidential Commission of Franklin Roosevelt in 1938. In those earlier days, when Jefferson wrote the lasting words, which I began with today, and when he served as president, Virginia represented all the promises and all the imperfections that this new land had to offer. Later on, as the South worked to rebuild itself from the ravages of Civil War and Reconstruction, Virginia continued to represent some of the best and some of the worst practices of the American experience. I often reflect that until the late 1960s, Virginia law would have precluded me and my wife from marrying, since we were of different races. The state has grown from some 800,000 in 1800 to more than 8 million today. It's become more ethnically complex. In fact, Virginia is now a pretty accurate microcosm of the demographics and the challenges of the nation as a whole. But we need to remember, we're thinking about the long-term impact of the words that Thomas Jefferson wrote, that not everybody was a winner in this long march. And because of the unique history of the South, two cultural groups were hit the hardest. The irony being that African Americans and rural whites have so often been pitted against each other in our national debates, when in reality their historic struggles should make them firm allies. So let's go back for a moment to the time when Thomas Jefferson studied and designed and dreamed and wrote on the grounds of this wonderful set of buildings and land. Two different worlds were busy creating a new America that would soon dominate our entire continent. And from this vantage point, to its east, Virginia created the sometimes harsh model that is most remembered as the embodiment of the Old South, the three-tiered society dominated by a small class of elites. The Jefferson's west, as he peered out from Monticello down the long spine of mountains that form what is now called far southwest Virginia, hundreds of thousands of settlers, dominated by the Scotch-Irish, who in Ireland are remembered as the Ulster Scots, had poured out of Northern Ireland into the Appalachian Mountains and beyond. These were not a slave-owning people. They had a family-based military tradition that went back hundreds of years. They accepted, by arrangement with the governor of Virginia, a life in the wilderness along the frontier outposts in order to practice their Calvinist religion in a state where religious discrimination was a matter of law. The double Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Vernon Lewis Parrington wrote of them, and I quote, "They were desperately poor. The available lands near the coast were already preempted. So armed with axes, their seed potatoes, and the newly invented rifle, they plunged into the backwoods to become our great pioneering race. A vigorous breed, hardy, assertive, individualistic, thrifty, trained in the democracy of the Scottish Kirk. They were the material out of which later Jacksonian democracy was to be fashioned." The Scotch-Irish provided the bulk of our soldiers during the Revolutionary War, including one of my direct ancestors who served in the Virginia line under George Washington, crossed the Delaware, camped through the desolate winter at Valley Forge, and three other of my ancestors who fought in decisive battles at Kings Mountain and Cowpens. Politically radical, rebellious, they held to the belief that no person owed his allegiance to any government whose edicts violated his personal moral code. Deeply religious, makers of moonshine, often hedonistic, dismissive of wealth, they measured people not by the size of their homes or their bank accounts, but by whether they respected them as human beings. They created country music, and over time they became the dominant culture of the non-slaveholding South. But generations spent in remote areas, such as those, had their rewards, and yet also there was a price to be paid. There were no roads, there were no schools, there were no libraries, there were no hospitals when the Scotch-Irish and their compatriots settled in the far southwest of the Virginia mountains. As with the fate of African Americans, generations of such deficiencies do not disappear overnight, and they do affect the momentum of a culture. In 1974, the National Opinion Research Center study of white ethnic groups showed that the white Baptists nationwide averaged only 10.7 years of education, which was almost identical to the level of blacks nationwide at 10.6 years of education, and well below that of other white groups. A recent NORC social survey of white adults born after World War II showed that in the years 1980 to 2000, only 18.4% of white Baptists and 21.8% of Irish Protestants, the principal ethnic group that settled the Mountain South, had obtained college degrees, compared to a national average of 30.1%, a Jewish average of 73.3%, and an average among those of Chinese and Indian descent of 61.9%. These are cultural rather than simply individual distinctions. As an example, in microcosm, Clay County, Kentucky, which is about 20 miles away from the tip of the far south West Virginia, is 95% white. It has a per capita income of $9,716. 40% of its residents live below the poverty line. Clay County has been reported to be the poorest county in America. During my time in the Senate, Remote Area Medical Team, which is called a RAM, which is very similar to what we did in Vietnam in terms of bringing medical assistance to rural areas that had no such assistance, came to the mountains of Wise County, Virginia, not far away from Clay County, and one county over from Scott County, where my dad's family came out of. And in one weekend, they took care of 6,798 people. 8 members of my staff joined in assisting them. They pulled more than 3,000 teeth as they operated in the open air of the Wise County Fairgrounds. And yet, as we develop programs designed to increase diversity and to help disadvantaged minorities, our policymakers have no hesitation in lumping all white cultures together, creating false measuring sticks, and in many cases, creating a double disadvantage for those who are trying to get a fair shot at success. First, these are people whose culture, for a variety of reasons, has been hard hit for generations. And second, because they are characterized by many government programs purely by their race, they're becoming ever more stuck in the bottom of a white America that is stratified and largely impervious to their needs. So today, as we measure Mr. Jefferson's immortal words, and as some seek to criticize him for his lack of actions in the face of his expressed philosophy, I would suggest that we consider whether we ourselves are in some way doing the same thing. In our good intentions to bring equality to America, have we fallen into something of a trap by making generalizations and even decisions based on this kind of race category? The truth in our society, as it becomes more apparent every day, is that vast differences in opportunity, in wealth, and in power occur within every racial group, and in fact have become greater rather than smaller due to programs put in place. And that's really the major point that I hope we would be considering today. Whatever one's view on other matters, we should agree, and I think with some urgency, that the greatest issue facing the United States today is fairness in all of its manifestations. I made economic fairness and social justice the principal issue of my campaign when I ran for the Senate. I made the issue of economic fairness the key issue in my 2007 rebuttal to President Bush's State of the Union address. My publisher may have a problem with this, but since my next book isn't going to be published for another month, but I'd like to end with a short excerpt from the book that I have coming out next month. It goes like this. I came to the Senate with no illusions. During my campaign for office, and at every possibility after I was elected, I sought to highlight our country's dangerous descent into a society where the elites at the very top have increasingly moved away from everybody else. until America threatens to become a modern-day version of a banana republic. I arrived with a full appreciation of our political process, gained over many years from a wide variety of professional perspectives. I've taken risks, sometimes making money and sometimes losing it. In between the two, to state the obvious, it feels a lot better to be making money. I did not come to the Senate to soak the rich or to punish the powerful. I want everybody to have the chance to become one or the other, or maybe both. There's nothing wrong with being rich, and almost every American dreams of it. It's a healthy dream for our country, as long as your riches and your influence are fairly earned. And in recent years, preceding and following my time in the Senate, I've worried about the atrophy of another part of what it means to be an American, that we thrive on a guarantee of fairness as well as opportunity, that our leaders have a moral duty to protect the weak and the vulnerable, and also the dream seekers, that we must never allow the very rich to become our masters. America was founded on a rebellion against royalty, in whatever form it might reveal itself, and on a guarantee that mere wealth should never be allowed to dictate the political direction of our country. Nothing would doom the American dream more quickly than the establishment of a permanent, removed aristocracy. The never-ending debate of how a society must balance an individual's personal freedom with his larger obligation to community and country has marked every civilization for thousands of years. But our unusual political system holds as its premise the belief that there should be no special access to the corridors of power other than through the force of argument and the rewards of individual talent. Putting boundaries on the misuse of influence by our most fortunate citizens without unfairly penalizing success is not a contradiction in terms. People from all over the world have always clamored to come to America so that they might be allowed to succeed. But the operative word is fair. Americans, by and large, do not envy wealth, nor do they cringe before power, but they have the right to expect our government leaders to ensure that we live inside a system that guarantees fairness. When I graduated from the Naval Academy in 1968, the average corporate executive made 20 times the salary of his workers. Today, that multiple is nearly 400. The reasons are complicated, but it is an axiom in Washington that when money talks, politicians often balk. It's not political bomb throwing to point out the truth that those who wish to preserve an uncomfortable tilting of the table against our working people have the most money to spend on a wide variety of political fronts, while others who wish for a more fundamental fairness lack the financial resources to back up their concerns, causing them to lose their influence in the corridors of power. Having spent most of my life as a sole proprietor, I know the frustrations of this reality. The silent losers for more than 4 decades have been those workers and small business owners in the middle of our society who have been paying an inordinate share of the tax bills to keep our system on track. For our own societal health, we need to find a better way. End of quote. As Thomas Jefferson and others showed us so many years ago, we do need to have the wisdom and the courage and the intellect to find a better way. Thank you very much for this honor, and thank you for allowing me to speak with you today.
Thank you, Senator Webb, for your service to our country in so many different ways, and for those very thoughtful words. I'm J.F. Bryan, a trustee of the board of the Thomas Jefferson Foundation. David Good, who is not able to join us this morning, and I'm honored to speak in his behalf. But in full disclosure, I absolutely know nothing about running a railroad. As part of the proud tradition, we invite friends and fellow admirers of Jefferson to present wreaths in honor of his birthday each year. your left to right, we have Lavinia Rogers from the Albemarle chapter of the National Society of the Daughters of the American Revolution. We have Stephen Meeks from the Albemarle Charlottesville Historical Society. Ann Malik and Jane Ditmar from the Albemarle County Board of Supervisors. Marek Ford for the Alliance Française de Charlottesville. Dorothy Shiflett from the Ashlawn Highlands, the College of William and Mary. C. Belton and Ann Tufts from the Blue Ridge Committee of the National Society of Colonial Dames of America and the Commonwealth of Virginia. Kirk Burkhardt from the Charlottesville Albemarle Convention and Visitors Bureau. And Mayor Huja for the Charlottesville City Council. Timothy Hulbert from the Charlottesville Regional Chamber of Commerce. And C. Douglas Smith from the James Madison's Montpelier. Frank Friedman for Piedmont, Virginia Community College. George Colbert for the Richmond, Virginia chapter of the Sons of the American Revolution. The Reverend Canon Henry Minich from the Thomas Jefferson chapter of the Sons of the American Revolution. Dan Grogan for the Thomas Jefferson Memorial Church, Unitarian Universalist. Douglas Wayne Harvey for the West Virginia Society of the Sons of the American Revolution. Dr. Henry P. Williams III from the Virginia Society of the Sons of the American Revolution. Jeffrey Nichols from the Thomas Jefferson's Poplar Forest. Joseph and Sally Gladden for the Thomas Jefferson Foundation. Alexander Gilliam from the University of Virginia. And Steve Gano for the President of the United States. For over a century, people have gathered here at Monticello to lay a wreath honoring Thomas Jefferson on his birthday. We thank you for your contribution to this long-standing tradition. Thank you.
And I invite our wreath presenters to take their seats. Please stand for the retrieval of the colors.
Got it.
So there, your final